a flotation cushion that we used to sit on the dinghy, right after she went in. But I couldn't tell if she got it or not. I'm never going to
ABC
forgive
News,
myself.
the boat was seized by the Coast Guard, and as you can see behind me, it now sits here at the Coast Guard station in Fort Pierce. Docked in the Indian River Lagoon, Soulmate, the boat belonging to Brian Hooker and his wife, Lynette Hooker. Sometime before Monday, sources tell ABC News, the boat was seized by the United States Coast Guard before being brought here to Fort Pierce.
A 46-foot sailboat named Soulmate sits docked at a United States Coast Guard station in Fort Pierce, Florida. Crime scene tape runs the length of the vessel. Federal agents in blue gloves move in and out of the cabin, placing items into labeled evidence bags. A table has been set up on the dock for processing. Whatever is on that boat, investigators want it badly. The boat belonged to a Michigan couple who had spent years chasing the open water together, selling their home, buying a sailboat, and documenting their life at sea on social media for thousands of followers. They called themselves the Sailing Hookers. One of them is now the subject of a federal criminal investigation. The other one has not been seen since the night of April 4th, 2026. Her name is Lynette Hooker. She was 55 years old, and according to her husband, she simply fell off a small boat in the dark, and the ocean took her. Investigators are not convinced. Before we get to what happened on the water that night, you need to know who Lynette Hooker was, because the woman who went missing was not someone who disappeared quietly. She left a record, thousands of photographs, dozens of videos, a public Instagram account that read like a living journal of a woman fully committed to the life she had built. Lynette Hooker was a mother, a sailor, and by every account from the people who knew her, someone who had found her place in the world on the water. She grew up in Michigan, near lakes and rivers, swimming and boating from the time she was young. Her mother, Darlene Hamlet, told reporters the family had always lived near water. It was never just a hobby for Lynette, it was how she moved through the world. She and Brian Hooker had been married for more than 20 years. He was 58. They had spent years talking about leaving land behind entirely, selling the house in Kentwood, Michigan, buying a sailboat, and living aboard full-time. In 2020, they did exactly that. They sold the home. Then came the search for the right boat. They found her in Rockport, Texas, a 1980 Morgan 461, a 46-foot keel sailboat. She was weathered. The decks needed work, but the Hookers saw what she could become. In a video posted to their YouTube channel, Lynette walks through the boat and describes the project with clear-eyed honesty. "She was a little rough on the edges," she said, "but we knew we were up for the task." They named the boat Soulmate. For the next several years, the Soulmate became their home. They crossed the Gulf of Mexico. They navigated Louisiana bayous. They spent time in Florida, then pushed south toward the Caribbean. Lynette documented all of it, cooking meals in a solar oven on deck, swimming with manatees, watching sea turtles drift past the hull. She posted video after video. Her followers watched her snorkel in turquoise water, laugh in the rain, describe the mechanics of sailing in the same tone someone else might talk about a commute. Here is what Brian Hooker told authorities. On the evening of April 4th, he and Lynette had spent the day at Tahiti Beach, a well-known sandbar gathering spot in the Abacos, and later had dinner at the Abaco Inn in Hopetown. Hopetown is a small, picturesque settlement on Elbow Cay, known for its candy-striped lighthouse and shallow, protected harbor. At approximately 7:30 in the evening, the couple left Hopetown aboard their 8-foot hard-bottomed dinghy, a small, rigid inflatable boat with a compact electric outboard motor, heading back towards Soulmate, which was anchored at Aunt Pat's Bay near Elbow Cay. Brian told police the weather turned. He said winds picked up to 20 miles per hour or higher, that conditions deteriorated, and that at some point during the crossing, Lynette fell overboard. He said she had been holding, or was wearing around her wrist, the ignition kill switch for the outboard motor. On small watercraft, these switches work exactly like the wrist tethers on personal watercraft. If the operator goes overboard, the switch pulls free and the engine cuts out immediately. According to Brian, that is exactly what happened. Lynette went over the side, the engine stopped, and the dark water swallowed her. He said he tried to reach her. He said the wind and current pulled them apart. He said he eventually paddled the dinghy to shore manually and reached the marina at Marsh
Hey
Harbor
everyone,
at
I'm Ashley
approximately
Banfield
4
and
in
this
the
is Drop
morning.
Dead Serious,
Roughly
and
8
I
to
have
9
a
hours
big
after Lynette
exclusive
went
piece of news
overboard.
to share with you
He reported her
regarding
missing at
the
that point.
Lynette and Brian
Search
Hooker
and rescue
story.
operations
If you'll
launched
recall,
immediately.
Lynette Hooker has
Lynette
been missing
Hooker
now for over 2
was
weeks.
never found.
On
From
a
the
Saturday
beginning,
night,
there were
a
problems
beautiful
with Brian
sunny
Hooker's account.
Saturday night on
Not
Elbow.
minor inconsistencies, specific, documented gaps that investigators and Lynette's family flagged almost immediately. The first was the weather. Witnesses in Hopetown that evening, including at least one boat captain familiar with the area, described conditions that night as calm. Not rough, not a storm. Flat water. Multiple people were out on the water that evening without incident, including families with children in small dinghies. The wind speeds Brian described, enough to bounce a 55-year-old woman off an 8-foot boat and separate them beyond reach, were not consistent with what others experienced that night. The second was the timing. Marsh Harbor, where Brian said he paddled to shore, sits approximately 4 miles from Hopetown by water. Brian Hooker arrived at the marina at 4 in the morning, 8 to 9 hours after departing Hopetown. Even accounting for wind, paddling 4 miles in an 8-foot rigid dinghy should not take the better part of a night. The third was what Brian told police about what Lynette was wearing. He described her as wearing a black 2-piece bathing suit. Family members and witnesses who had seen Lynette that day described her in an aquamarine bathing suit cover-up and a royal blue headscarf. Some accounts also reference a small fanny pack. Brian's description of her clothing did not match what people who saw her alive that day reported. The fourth came from Lynette's daughter, Carly Aylesworth. She raised a pointed question. Her mother was an experienced sailor. Brian was the one who typically drove the dinghy. So why did Lynette have the keys? Why was the kill switch tethered to her, and not to the person operating the engine? Those 4 questions circulated publicly within days of Lynette's disappearance. They were enough for Bahamian authorities to act. The arrest and 5 days in custody. On April 8th, 4 days after Lynette went missing, the Royal Bahamas police force arrested Brian Hooker. He was taken into custody as a person of interest in connection with his wife's disappearance. At that same moment, the United States Coast Guard opened its own separate criminal investigation. The Coast Guard's jurisdiction extended to the case because Soulmate flew a U.S. flag and was a U.S.-registered vessel. American maritime law follows the flag regardless of where the boat is in the world. Brian was held in Freeport, Grand Bahama. His Bahamian attorney, Terrell Butler, confirmed he was cooperating and denied any wrongdoing. Over the following days, police conducted multiple rounds of questioning, including a 4-hour session on April 10th, after which authorities sought an extension to continue holding him for an additional 72 hours. Bahamian law sets strict limits on how long a person can be detained without formal charges. Investigators worked until the very last permitted hour. On the night of April 13th, exactly 5 days after his arrest, Brian Hooker walked out of custody. The prosecution had not gathered sufficient evidence to support formal charges within the legal window. He was released without charges. Standing outside, his attorney spoke briefly to reporters. Brian Hooker said he had never harmed Lynette. "I've never harmed Lynette, and I would never harm Lynette, and I want to find Lynette." In an earlier Facebook post, written the morning before his arrest, he had said, "I am heartbroken over the recent boat accident in unpredictable seas and high winds that caused my beloved Lynette to fall from our small dinghy near Elbow Cay in the Bahamas. Despite desperate attempts to reach her, the winds and currents drove us further apart. We continue to search for her, and that is my sole focus." He had also said publicly that he would not leave the Bahamas until he found his wife. Hours after his release, Brian Hooker left the Bahamas. Carly Aylesworth, Lynette's daughter from a prior relationship, had been raising alarms since the first day her mother went missing. Brian was her stepfather. He had been in her life since she was around 3 years old. She was not approaching this with hostility for its own sake. She wanted answers. She appeared on multiple broadcasts, gave interviews to national news outlets, and used her own social media to push the case forward when she feared it would be forgotten. Her questions were specific and consistent. She questioned why Brian did not drop anchor when Lynette went overboard. Anchoring the dinghy would have kept him stationary and given Lynette a fixed point to swim toward. Instead, by his own account, he paddled in the opposite direction for hours. She questioned the kill switch, specifically who normally drove the dinghy. Her understanding was that Brian operated the motor. If that was the case, the kill switch should have been on him, not Lynette. She also described the relationship as having a documented history of conflict. In 2015, Kentwood, Michigan police responded to an incident between Brian and Lynette Hooker. Both accused each other of assault. Brian was found with a swollen, bleeding nose. Lynette, described as heavily intoxicated, told police that Brian had also struck her. No charges were filed. Prosecutors determined there was insufficient evidence to establish who initiated the assault. The case was dismissed. Carly also told investigators and the public that witnesses had reported a separate incident years earlier in which Brian, during a domestic argument, allegedly pursued a child upstairs in the family home and placed his hands around the child's neck. That account was reported in Michigan police records. None of that constitutes criminal conviction. Brian Hooker has never been charged with a violent offense. But Carly Aylesworth has been consistent. She does not believe her mother simply fell off a boat. On Mother's Day, her first without Lynette, she posted a video from her phone. Her voice was measured, controlled, and devastating. "It's pretty hard right now to know that she's not a text away anymore," she said. In the same video, she reported something unusual. 2 men she had never seen before had boarded Soulmate and were moving the vessel. Brian was not among them. They had turned off the boat's GPS transponder. The boat was heading north toward Florida. Hours later, the U.S. Coast Guard confirmed they had seized the vessel. The U.S. Coast Guard Investigative Service, known as CGIS, is a federal law enforcement body. Its agents are sworn officers who investigate violations of U.S. law wherever the Coast Guard holds jurisdiction. They work closely with the Department of Justice and, when necessary, collaborate with the FBI and federal forensic laboratories, including the facility at Quantico, Virginia. CGIS agents intercepted Soulmate as it moved north through the Bahamas toward Florida. The vessel was taken into custody and towed to the U.S. Coast Guard station in Fort Pierce, Florida. Within days, the boat was designated an official crime scene. Tape went up. Access was locked down. On May 12, 2026, 5 weeks after Lynette Hooker disappeared, CGIS agents boarded Soulmate and began a systematic forensic examination of the vessel. Witnesses near the dock photographed agents in blue gloves carrying boxes and sealed evidence bags off the boat. A processing table was set up on the dock. Items were logged, sealed, and prepared for transport and analysis. What were they looking for? Modern live-aboard sailboats like Soulmate are not passive environments. The vessel had been the Hookers' full-time home for years, which means it contained every layer of their daily life. Personal effects, electronic devices, clothing, bedding, food stores, navigation equipment, and more. Beyond the physical contents, the boat itself could hold forensic information. Any sign of physical altercation. Trace evidence on surfaces. Biological material that might tell investigators more than a story ever could. The boat was also equipped with a Starlink satellite internet system mounted high on the mast, positioned for maximum range. Any phone or connected device within proximity of the vessel would have automatically connected to that network. Both Brian and Lynette carried smartphones. If either of them came within range of Soulmate after the time Brian claims they left for their dinner at the Abaco Inn, that connection would have logged. The boat's battery management system, a component common in modern live-aboard sailboats that tracks all electrical draws and usage, would have recorded every action that required power aboard the vessel after that point. Water usage, lighting, charging ports, appliances. Each draws current. Each creates a time-stamped record. If the boat's electronic systems were recording, investigators may be able to reconstruct a timeline of what happened aboard Soulmate on the night of April 4th, and whether it matches the account Brian Hooker gave to police. 1 week before seizing Soulmate, CGIS took an additional investigative step that went relatively unnoticed at the time. The agency publicly released photographs of a second sailboat, an unidentified vessel that, according to investigators, had been moored near Soulmate at Aunt Pat's Bay on the day Lynette disappeared. CGIS issued a formal appeal. They needed to speak with whoever owned or occupied that boat. The owners or occupants, the agency stated in an internal memo obtained by CBS News, may have information relevant to the investigation. This is significant. It means investigators believe there may have been witnesses present near the Hooker's location on April 4th, someone who saw something, heard something, or noticed something that they either do not realize is relevant or have not yet come forward to report. As of the most recent reporting, that vessel and its occupants have not been publicly identified. Brian Hooker's current location is not publicly confirmed. His Bahamian attorney said he returned to the United States to be with his ailing mother. His U.S.-based attorney, Crystal Hauser, has declined to answer questions from media outlets in one instance, hanging up the phone when reached by CBS News for comment. In a prior statement, she asked the public to extend Brian the benefit of the doubt and to consider that people handle grief in different ways. He has not been charged with any crime. That is a fact, and it matters. Investigations do not equal guilt. Suspicion is not a verdict. The United States Coast Guard, the Royal Bahamas Police Force, and federal prosecutors all operate under evidentiary standards that require proof, not public pressure. What is also fact? Lynette Hooker has been missing for more than 5 weeks. No body has been recovered. The search shifted from rescue to recovery within 4 days of her disappearance. The ocean in that region, while relatively protected compared to open Atlantic waters, is shaped by wind and current in ways that can carry a person far from where they entered the water. The investigation is active. The boat is a designated crime scene. CGIS agents are conducting interviews. Federal forensic processing of Soulmate's contents is underway. Sources close to the investigation have indicated that significant developments may be coming. Lynette Hooker's daughter is still waiting for answers. Her first Mother's Day without her mother has come and gone. Lynette's mother, Darlene Hamlet, is still waiting. The friends Lynette made at marinas across the Gulf, the Caribbean, and the Bahamas, the people who watched her videos and followed her adventures on the water, are still waiting. A sailboat named Soulmate sits in federal custody in Fort Pierce, Florida. Crime scene tape surrounds it. Federal agents have processed its contents. Whatever happened on the night of April 4th, 2026, whatever the water knows that we do not, the investigation is now looking for the answer in the one place that cannot change its story. The boat. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old. She loved the ocean. She spent years building a life on it. She is still missing. If you have any information related to this case, the U.S. Coast Guard Investigative Service is actively seeking tips, including information about the unidentified sailboat moored near Soulmate on April 4th, 2026, at Aunt Pat's Bay in the Bahamas. This case is ongoing. We will continue to follow it.